Hey Mary, how are you? I'm good.
I am fine. I always feel like there are so many Minneapolis connections because you got Wurster, who's Bob Mold, and
Yeah,
he good friends with Bob Mayer, who's a good friend of mine. You
yeah.
got Brian Paulson,
Brian Paulson, who I was just texting with yesterday. Yeah.
legendary. And you wrote a song called Front of the House. And did you know Monty Lee Wilkes?
The name is very familiar.
He was a sound dude for a lot of bands, but his whole motto was um I'm not happy unless you're not happy.
Uh-huh.
And that was his slogan. And but his whole people made t-shirts after he passed and it was FOH. And I always think of that
Oh
when I say
wow.
that
Okay.
song.
Is he
So
at first Ave?
yeah, he was first out, and
Okay.
he was also on tour with just every derelict known in the 80s. So
Gotcha.
yeah.
Well, and I feel a strong connection to Minneapolis in terms of playing there because we played there on our very first tour. That
Mhm.
wasn't just going to New York or whatever. Like before we even had an album out, we maybe had two singles or something like that, and we did a tour that we just booked ourselves along with the band Geek and the band Seaweed. The three of us
Mhm.
did a
Mhm.
tour together, and that was the furthest we got from home was Minneapolis. I think at the Uptown,
Uptown.
yeah, and there was people there, so that was just like a mind blowing thing, from the first time we went to Minneapolis that the people came to see us, even though we barely had any records out at all. Was pretty wild, and yeah, we've
I
always had a
think
great time there.
I think that had something to do. The first radio job I had was in 1994 at a station called Rev 105, and we played Superchunk. And I think it was conducive to a lot of great bands all of a sudden discovering that Minneapolis has four seasons and you don't necessarily have to come here in December or January.
Right,
You could,
right.
but come enjoy the spring, summer, and fall here. But a lot of bands that end up starting their tours here, and I have no actual reason why they start in the middle.
That's interesting. I don't know. That was the summer of 1990.
Mhm.
That first time we played there, and so we came during a nice time of year for sure. The first time, but we've
Yes.
we've definitely been there in all seasons.
I have to ask because, any band that's had the longevity that you guys have had too, when you were touring, I mean, pre really internet, I mean, who was just writing down numbers of bars and record stores and places to, stay for the night?
Yeah, it was. I mean, that really is what it was, and it's almost hard to understand how anything ever came together. But
I know.
I remember on that, like I said, that first tour, Jenny Toomey from the band Geek, and she and Kristen from DC had a label called Simple Machines, and they, I believe, started the process of booking that tour and getting numbers. And I'm pretty sure that Peter Davis, who was also a booking agent for some
Hmm.
bands that we knew and had a fanzine called Your Flesh,
Hmm.
he, I think, is the one who we got in touch with about booking that first show in Minneapolis.
it's just it's the kids need to understand what it was like when you had to actually look at a phone book if you could find one or a pay phone.
Well, and so then the other thing that's always crazy to me now when we're pulling into a town or just trying to find a venue or a restaurant or anything
Mhm.
is the idea that we had to have a road atlas and you'd be on the phone with someone at the club and they're like talking you into town, like telling you which way to go and where to turn
Right.
and stuff like that, especially if you didn't remember to print out the directions before you left, from like the MapQuest website or whatever. It was just like
The
everything was just
Kinkos.
so
Yeah.
much more complicated. But I mean, it's what you did, so you didn't really think it was more complicated.
So with Wild Loneliness, the 12th album from you guys, and I don't want to dwell too much because yes, it was written, recorded under the oddest of circumstances, which by the way, we hit the 2-year anniversary of all the lockdown was yesterday.
Mm,
So we've literally been living like this for 2 years.
yeah.
And people who are creative, generally speaking, I think found a way around it. Like a lot of people who are in the midst of recording, it's like, well, hey, you send me some stuff and Dropbox or whatever, and, we'll make it happen. It's maybe not the most ideal for you, but are you still pretty happy with the way everything turned out?
I am. And, it's such a, like you said, such a strange time and such a strange confluence of events that no one could have predicted. And I had started writing the songs for this record before the lockdown. Mm-hmm. And I was writing them on acoustic guitar because I thought that it would be cool for this record to take a turn in that direction, to do a record of new songs, but in the mold of the Acoustic Foolish album that we did in 2019. Because our last album, What a Time to Be Alive, was so electric and so punky and loud and aggressive. And I didn't feel like it would be super constructive or enjoyable to try to sustain that energy for the next album as well. That felt like a moment in time. And while we still feel that anger every day, maybe making a whole another album of songs drawn from that wouldn't be the best idea. So started writing songs on acoustic guitar. And then when the lockdown happened, I couldn't write a song to save my life for about 6 months. I mean, I just couldn't get my brain to go in that way. As you said, you find a way to do things. And I was working on a film score at the time, and I could write instrumental music. And so I worked on this film score for a movie called Moxie that's on Netflix.
Amy Poehler
directed it and is in it. Mm-hmm. And when I finished with that film score, I could move on and think about writing songs again. So when I continued writing, I was staying in this with these kind of rules that I had given myself, where I'm going to play acoustic guitar on this record. And when we realized that studios and everything else wasn't opening up anytime soon, we decided to just start making this record at home. Mm-hmm. And what that meant was I would send a demo around, and then John, our drummer, would come over and sit over there with his mask on, and I'd be sitting over here with my mask on, and he'd be recording his drum parts. And then Jim Wilbur, our guitar player, would come do the same thing. And we kind of built the record like that. And Laura has a recording set up at her house, so she could do her bass there. And yeah, it's not ideal. It's the first record we've ever made where we weren't all in the studio together playing the songs live.
Right.
But I'm happy with the way it came out, because I feel like it doesn't come off like that. We didn't want it to sound like a home recording project. We didn't want it to sound lo-fi. Mm-hmm. And I give a lot of credit to Wally Gagel, who mixed the record. We made a record with him in 1995 called Here's Where the Strings Come In. He was the house engineer at Fort Apache in Boston. Yep. And we've always loved the way that record sounds. We love the drum sounds on there, especially. And so I just said, Wally, I really don't want the drums to sound like I recorded them in this little room in my basement.
Right.
And so he made it sound like a Superchunk record. And yeah, I'm really happy with the way it sounded. We got to collaborate with amazing people who were also sitting in their homes for the most part, wherever they were, and recording their stuff. Tracy Ann Campbell, who added her vocals to the song This Night, she's in the band Camera Obscura. She'd never recorded at home before, but everyone was having to figure this stuff out,
Exactly. And I mean, having guests on a Superchunk album isn't anything new, but did you have certain songs in mind and go, oh God, let's get Sharon Van Etten for this? Or was it more organic than that, where it was just like,
I think those things kind of revealed themselves as we got closer to finishing each song. In other words, when I could hear the whole band playing, then it's easier to hear what's missing, or what a song could really use to elevate it in some way or make it more interesting, Mm-hmm. And so, when I wrote, for instance, On the Floor on acoustic guitar, and once the drums and everything was added, it had a real REM for me, was a reference in my brain when I started writing that song. And once the song was coming together, it still had that feeling to me. And Franklin Bruno, who plays piano on it, I said, Franklin, I'm thinking about songs like South Central Rain, these REM songs with piano. And so Franklin played an amazing piano part, and Mike Mills from REM was kind enough to sing backing vocals on it. He's one of the most iconic backup singers in music, and it's amazing to have his voice on there. So it was just really song by song, each one, by the time we kind of got close to completion of the song, it just gave us ideas about who would be great with to be on there.
Well, normally, would Superchunk as a band be the kind of band that makes a record, feels pretty good about it, then thinks we're going to kind of just work all these songs out live on the road? Or are you the kind of band that's like, no, this has to be tight as hell before we even get before an audience?
I mean, normally we've learned them well enough to play them together in the studio so that when we come back together to tour, we kind of have them in our brains already. You know, we rehearse and everything before we play our first show, obviously. But yeah, this is an unusual situation where we played our first 2 shows of the tour last weekend, and we were playing those songs as a band for the first time, you know, and that's very strange. That's a very strange, not especially comfortable feeling. But after a couple of days of rehearsal, and we had the first show under our belt, it felt pretty good. There's still a few that we haven't tried yet. So hopefully when the tour continues in April, we'll maybe get some more into the set list.
And I mean, clearly, obviously, this was not your only job throughout all this, but maintaining and running Merge Records, which I wondered if you noticed a spike in online record sales during the lockdown and quarantine. I mean, I can only speak for my friends. People went a little bananas. It was like, yeah, I mean, you didn't realize maybe how much you took for granted just being able to flip through a record store. But it was like, our block was covered with delivery, and everybody had a Brown album that was being delivered to their house for 2 years.
No, that was a huge thing for the label because, like you said, you're sitting at home, used to being able to, maybe even if you just go to casually look and you don't buy anything, going to the record store, talking to your friends who work there, et cetera, et cetera. So I think people really, for 2 reasons. One, people realize that businesses are all suffering and people wanted to support the people that they normally support. So, you know, they're getting takeout from their favorite restaurants, they're mail ordering records, but also you're sitting at home for 2 years. I mean, you want to listen to some new music. And if vinyl is the way you normally do that, that's an awesome package to get in the mail, you know? So, I mean, I know I bought a lot of records during the pandemic, and our mail order people at Merge are still the only people that are back in the office, and they've been there pretty much as soon as they were legally allowed to go back in there, and they've been super busy and really holding down the fort over there.
Mac, when you were growing up, did you have like the cool indie record store that people hung out at and kind of wanted to be as cool as the people who worked there? Sure.
There's a record store called School Kids. School Kids still exists in Chapel Hill, but this is a different location, different owner and everything. A really small record store called School Kids. And I remember telling my parents, you know, in high school, we want to go hang out on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. And they're like, what do you do? We just go hang out on the street? And it's like, what it really meant was like, we're going to the record store and we're just going to like hang out in there, you know? It was, you know, it was like a super formative thing to do. And later I ended up working at that store, and you know, now there's a lot of different stores, but yes, School Kids was the place where we would go and hang out.
And, you know, I feel like there was always, I mean, we've all seen High Fidelity and all that, but there were certain, maybe not so much anymore, but there was, I guess you might call them tastemakers, but there were some people that did man those jobs that were way overqualified, but nonetheless, maybe turned you on to a band that you might otherwise have just ignored.
Definitely.
Can you think of somebody?
And it could go both ways because, you know, they would certainly recommend things, or you hear something that they're playing in there, or like you pull up one record by an artist and they go, oh, actually, like you should get this one first or something like that. There's definitely times when I would bring up a record. I remember hearing a song by the band Icicle Works, a great song called Whisper to a Scream, and going to the store and getting the Icicle Works record and bringing it up, and the guy behind the counter saying, like, you're not going to listen to that record in a year, like trying to dissuade me from buying this thing. And I still bought it, and I still like Icicle Works, so the joke's on him. But, you know, there are definitely people that, you know, would give you advice about what you were listening to.
That is priceless. And did you also feel awfully special when you caved in and bought like maybe your first import or picture disc?
Oh my gosh, imports were so important and so special living in North Carolina, especially, like I guess if you live in a big city, there's a lot more access to that kind of thing. But here there weren't that many. So if one came in and it was one you were looking for, that was very exciting. And there's also definitely bands that, I think of the band The Teardrop Explodes, who's one of my favorite bands. I love Julian Cope and I love that band. But I feel like the first record I got by them, I only got because it was an import that had sat there long enough that they had, discounted it. And I was like, oh, I mean, it looks cool. It's an import. Like, I'll just, you know what I mean? Like, it's got to be good. It's from England. I'm going to get that. And then that's how I found out about one of my favorite bands.
I think that's the only way any of us got our hands on the Clash's first record. That was
right, because it was a while before it came out over here.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the whole idea again of putting these songs together under these circumstances. Now you've got a couple shows under your belt. I don't even know, like, how at this point, how do you book? Do you book a full tour just and cross your fingers, or do you just go, should we be just more sensible about certain dates and then come back home? Or how do you navigate this in 2022?
I mean, I feel for the booking agents, and they have an insanely difficult job right now because stuff gets moved around all the time. So we just booked a tour like we normally would. And these days that means, 2 weeks on the East Coast, maybe a week on the West Coast, try to figure out some Midwest dates. And nearly all of it got rearranged. So it's all happening now, but it's, not happening when we originally thought it would. So I think it's just learning to be prepared to be flexible.
Yes.
And our drummer, John, as you mentioned, plays with Bob Mould. He plays in the Mountain Goats. And so we're working around 3 bands tour dates that are all in flux. You know what I mean? So it's complicated, but I'm excited that it's finally happening.
What was the first big event with people you attended in the last 2 years?
Oh, wow. That is a really good question. I remember the last show that I went to for lockdown was Destroyer at the Cat's Cradle in Carrboro. And I feel like the first event that I went to with a lot of people was maybe a Carolina Hurricanes hockey game last year when they were in the playoffs. And my son and I went. He's 14, and it was very strange being in a room with that many people, even though people were good about wearing their masks. It was just that slightly on edge feeling about, like, is this really a smart thing to do?
I know.
You know what I mean? Like,
am I willing to die for this hockey team? Yeah.
Exactly. And I've been to shows since then, indoor shows, outdoor shows. I put out a solo record last year called The Sound of Yourself, and we scheduled a tour in that brief moment where it seemed like things were getting normal before Delta. And the tour was in September. So by the time the tour happened, things were not normal, but we went through with it. And it was an interesting vibe because the crowds were not packed, but there was enough people that the shows felt really good, and everyone wore their masks, but mainly just that feeling that everyone was just so excited to be seeing music.
I know.
People that did come there. And almost everyone said, like, this is my first show back, like that kind of thing. And so while it was nerve-wracking, but we all stayed healthy, it was cool to be a part of that thing where we're all kind of in this together, and we're all slightly nervous, but also excited about doing it,
Yes. I mean, I think I sort of in my mind sort of was weighing the options of, I had a couple of things that I could potentially go do for my first dive back into the public. And I was like, where will people be less drunk and dumb? Yeah. Because that's going to affect the whole. And then, of course, I end up going to see the Stones. So,
oh, well.
So I was like, well, whatever, I'll go.
I assume it was outdoors if it was the Stones, right?
It actually was indoors.
Okay.
We literally took to the the back row. Our seats were much better than that, but we consciously walked up to the absolute last row. There was no one around us, and it was probably not the most ideal way to see them, but nonetheless,
you did it.
We did it. Well, so when is the Minneapolis-St. Paul date that you guys have? Do you know?
Well, we don't have one scheduled yet. We're working on it because the last time we played Minneapolis, we had an amazing time. We played a street fest outside Grumpy's, and my son came with me. We went to a Twins game. We always have a great time there. So looking forward to coming back hopefully this year.
Well, Mac, thank you for talking to me. Are you doing like a boom, 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 boom interview kind of thing all day today?
Not all day today. No, I've been doing it, pretty consistently, something every day.
Right.
But it's fun to have a new record to talk about.
No kidding. Well, the record it is it's amazing, and we've been loving it because again, there's messages in there, but there's banging pop songs, and what better way to get sort of interesting messages through than you don't have to be like the Cure 1980. I mean, it's like you can still sound like a pop rock band and get certain messages across, which I think is great. But Wild Loneliness, it's the new record from Superchunk. Mac, thank you for talking.
Thank you.